Hello and welcome to Our Heritage. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. In our previous tour, we concentrated on the western end of Bridgetown. Attention was called to the Jubilee Garden, the James Fort, and the St. Mary's Church, among others. In this program, Professor Fraser and Dr. Watson will continue to highlight that special history and heritage of Greater Bridgetown that formed a part of the dossier submitted to UNESCO. The year 2010 marked the 250th anniversary of the coming of Methodism to the Caribbean and the Americas. It is a fascinating story that reads like the biblical one that talks about a young child leading them. The early years were marked by incessant persecution. Barbados did not escape this. This building stands as a monument to that struggle and as a people's determination to ensure that that amazing love of Christ is continually told.
This, of course, everybody knows is James Street Church on the site of land donated by the famous national hero Sarah Ann Gill. Sarah Ann Gill was the daughter of a planter and a lady whom he loved from the plantation of Molyneux.
Dr. Watson joins the tour now. He places things in perspective and he details the fundamental role of national hero, the Right Excellent Sarah Ann Gill.
Back in the 18th century, in the Anglican Church, enslaved people were not actively welcome in church. In fact, if you go into Anglican church of the old days, you would see where the pews have little brass card holders where people could actually rent pews. So it reflected society and social status and so on. And the closer you were to the altar, the more important you were. If you were an Anglican priest who was taking your job seriously, then yes, they would welcome and bring slaves into the church. But generally speaking, the Anglican Church preached a message that if you were poor, if you were downtrodden, if you were oppressed, if you were a slave, whatever your conditions were, you had to accept them in this life and hope for better in the life to come. When the Methodists came to the Caribbean in the second half of the 18th century, they challenged many issues and they actively sought out and proselytized and carried the gospel to enslaved people. Methodist preachers were attacked and physically injured, and the last Methodist preacher here, Shrewsbury, was actually driven off the island. But a free-colored woman, when the missionaries were gone, she took up Islam, she opened up her house, and she invited the enslaved people of Bridgetown to come and hear the gospel. And that woman's name was Sarah Ann Gill. James Street Methodist Church is built on property that Sarah Ann Gill left to the church.
Her house was over there where that attractive pink building is, and the only compensation we can say for the tragic demolition of Sarah Ann Gill's house, which was quite inappropriate, situated in that corner with some quite nice architectural features, is the fact that at least the building that has replaced it is quite attractive. The old building was a bit shabby, and as everything happens in Barbados, when there's a bit of rot in a floorboard or peeling paint, everybody says knock it down. So it was knocked down and it could have been restored, but it wasn't.
During an edition of the CBC Evening News, the church responded to the historians, stating that it was not the home of the Right Excellent Sarah Ann Gill. The historians, however, maintain that it was indeed the home of the national hero.
Be that as it may, the church has been beautifully restored, and the church has a wonderful basement which was really just ancient crypts, very dusty ancient crypts, not used at all. But in the restoration that was recently completed, they've converted all of that basement area into very, very useful rooms which the parish of James Street uses. The rose window up there is a very attractive feature of the church. Look across though at this little building, because this little building is interesting. Anyone, of course, will tell me what the architectural style is, yes, Georgian or Gothic? Georgian or Gothic? Obviously Gothic, with your lancet windows and your finials. The word finial describes the decorative upward projections on the corners of the building. And anyone know what this building is called? This is in fact the Wesley Hall. This was the church hall and vestry hall of the James Street Church. And Methodism was started by John Wesley, and this was the Methodist Church Hall for James Street. Hence it was called the Wesley Hall. And when they started their church school, of course, it was the Wesley Hall Boys School. So this is not named after the famous Reverend Wes Hall, the cricketer. Wes Hall was in fact named after this inspired church and religious leader, okay? But it's a lovely old building, and I'm sorry to see that. Pardon?
Someone looking after it now?
Well, this is my concern. I haven't spoken to the church about it. It is not in good condition. I don't know the extent to which it's used or looked after. But are there any Methodists among us? Yes? Would you, on the behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, would you inquire about what's happening to this building? Because although it's not actually falling down, the condition, it looks as if it could do with a little maintenance. Yes? Including re-leading and replacing the panes and doing a little weeding around the fabric and making sure that inside is not falling apart. So you will let us know, won't you?
There's a lot to be seen from this junction here on James Street. There's Lucas Street, Prince William Henry Street, and Corey Street. If these buildings could talk, you would hear.
The fires of Bridgetown have demolished most of Bridgetown. And the last great fire that came through here in this area seems to have stopped here. And then there was a fire that burnt most of the other areas. And this block right here, with these three buildings, I think, are one of the few sections of contiguous buildings in Old Bridgetown that appears not to have been demolished, damaged by fire or hurricane to the point that it was demolished and completely rebuilt. These are three extremely old structures. You can look at these buildings. First of all, they're built of brick. Secondly, they have very small doors, very low doors. In fact, you know, many of us, Sherwood, you would have difficulty going through the doors into what was Harford Chambers. The building right here on the corner was Harford Chambers. It's owned by our Prime Minister, Mr. Freundel Stewart. It's named Harford Chambers after Mr. Lee Harford Skeet, my father-in-law, who was the headmaster of Foundation School and who would have taught Mr. Stewart, hence the name. But this building here is regarded generally as perhaps the oldest surviving complete building in Bridgetown, because it's built of brick, it's built at ground level, and it's built with a Dutch gable. And so that gable at the end, with the curves in and out, or curvilinear Dutch gable end, and a door at the top. Why would you think they'd have that door at the top? There would have been a winch up there, and there would have been a winch and a rope, and the storeroom was at the top. This was the Dutch style. If you go down the canals in Amsterdam, as you go down the canal, building after building after building, all with these beautiful Dutch gables, and they've all got the door at the top into which these stores would have been placed, you see.
Most of us can easily identify the elements of the African and English retention here on the island. But what is not often brought into focus are the elements of this group of people who brought us the technology for growing sugarcane, the Dutch.
But I would think that the influence of the Dutch in Barbados would have been somewhere between 1640 and 1670, that kind of era. And if you look at the famous Copen print, I don't know whether he called himself Copen or Coppen, but in the Barbados Museum there's a wonderful, wonderful etching showing a panoramic view of Bridgetown, from the sea. And when you look at that print with a magnifying glass, there is intricate detail of almost every building. And there are a large number of either curvilinear or stepped Dutch gables in Bridgetown, recorded by Coppen in 1690. So that's in the Barbados Museum, in the Cunard Gallery of the Barbados Museum. It's a wonderful print. I use that print in the Barbados-Carolina Connection to show what Bridgetown looked like in the early days. And it's also used on the cover of a very famous book which should be in everybody's hands, Warren Alleyne's Historic Bridgetown. And there's hardly anything I'm telling you today, apart from the little stories about Mr. Goddard and company, that is not in Warren Alleyne's book about Historic Bridgetown.
Many of us have drawn from the book Historic Bridgetown. It has acted as a researcher's leading tool and has provided the impetus for further in-depth research on Historic Bridgetown. Many thanks to war veteran and historian Warren Alleyne, who recognized the importance of this area and laid some of the foundation for its study. Professor Fraser continues now, if walls could talk.
Coming over to this building here on the corner of Coleridge Street, this was the site of a famous Bridgetown theatre in the middle of the 19th century. And there's a story which was told to me by my mother-in-law, who grew up in Baxter's Road and knew a lot of the history of old Bridgetown. She said that this building changed hands as a result of a bet. Card players, you know, and someone just bet too much, lost too much, and lost the building because this was a regular site for poker.
If you were to go to New Orleans, this building would look quite in place in New Orleans. It reflects that French Creole structure. Beautiful wraparound balcony with the use of cast iron railings. And it's a nice juxtaposition in the streetscape of two very different styles, two buildings from two periods in Bridgetown's history, but two buildings illustrative of the nature. And both of these buildings feature very well in the dossier that we sent forward to UNESCO.
The building on the right, which is Motley House, that was also the site of a newspaper run by Samuel Jackman Prescott, the Liberal, not the West Indian. The West Indian was one my great-grandfather ran. Samuel Jackman Prescott ran the newspaper from that site, his paper called the Liberal. Beyond there, of course, is the late 19th century expanded Central Station building, and it's a building which I think has been well expanded. The wings on either side are not exact replicas, but they're not modern disasters. They are in sympathy with the building, okay? They have enough relief of the main structure of the building to match and to harmonize with the original building, and they do retain the original sash windows on the ground floor and the Demerara windows with the cooler tray on the upper floor. So it's a very harmonious building on either side. Right behind this wall here is another interesting structure. It was also the site of the first fire station. Did Johnson's take it over then and they ran out of here? Okay, I didn't know that, thanks. Anybody else has useful information about this corner? Because on every corner there's a nice historic feature. This was, I'm told, Johnson's Stables after it ceased to be the fire station. This is the telephone company structure. I don't know if they still own it, but this was the telephone company building. And when Cave Shepherd fire took place in the 1969, was it? Cave Shepherd rented this place and was a temporary Cave Shepherd. What I like is the fire escape over there. Huh? Everyone would be happy of escaping from a fire here, coming down those stairs.
We move now to one of the oldest structures here in Greater Bridgetown. Its most recent incarnation has been its use as the Supreme Court,
which, as you can see, has been abandoned. And if you look at it, you can see its very ongoing deterioration taking place before your very eyes. And if it continues to be locked up and not used, this too will disappear. But this was a multifunctional building. It was where the House of Assembly met. It was where debtors and French prisoners of war were housed. It's where courts were held. So laws were made here, and the perpetrators were imprisoned here. It played a tripart function in Barbadian society.
And it led a visitor to Barbados to say with great irony and sarcasm that Barbados was the only place he had ever been where the parliamentarians, the council, the legislators, and the prisoners all shared the same home. Okay? And it was the prison until Glenderry was built. And when the first block on Glenderry was built, they moved some of the prisoners out but they left the majority actually there, according to Warren Alleyne's data. Now, the building is a beautiful Georgian building. It's a large building. It's a classic Georgian structure on 3 stories. And the next time you drive down Coleridge Street, pause before you reach the Carnegie Library and look across at that building. In the 19th century, a veranda was added on the sides, a typical Victorian veranda. In the 1950s, in order for the clerks of the court and the people who worked with the lawyers in the registrar's office not to get wet at any time, they built a corridor joining the registry building and the Supreme Court building. So it went from the center of the 1950s registry building over to the middle of the facade with the beautiful pediment of the Supreme Court building. As I said in Treasures of Barbados, the registrar invaginated the Supreme Court, and it was the most extraordinary piece of architectural disaster I've ever seen in Barbados, because nobody then saw anything but a half of the building. You never saw the symmetry, you never saw the whole beautiful facade again from about 1952, I think it was, that was done. Now, that building really had a splendid Supreme Court, a 2-story court, and it had a balcony on 3 sides, so that the chamber in which the major cases were tried had a great sense of presence. And then they said, well, they don't have enough room, so they filled it in. So there's an upper level, and the 2-story level of the Supreme Court was then destroyed. What I would really like to see is that this corner should be developed as the center of historic Bridgetown, because I think it could be a tremendous commercial proposition, and those beautiful old buildings there of the right to the west of us here, that could be the centerpiece, because it's an unused building. It could be restored, it could be the restaurant. There's a courtyard inside, yes, stables and so on. And you know, with the library there, the Supreme Court should be a historic site. When you go to Philadelphia, for example, you see where the Declaration of Independence was signed. You know, you see the chambers all restored and maintained as they were 220 years ago.
This building has been the public's university, perhaps the only truly democratic institution in the country, in the sense that it has welcomed and provided reference and information services to all, a central component in every nation, a public library which was operated from this beautiful Carnegie building. Today, sadly, its present state is being lamented by many.
And that is just over 100 years old, and everybody knows that it was Carnegie, the great benefactor, the Scotsman who was taken to America at the age of 8, had no formal education, but on becoming a billionaire, he decided that he'd like to educate the world. And I think he donated some 500 plus libraries, free libraries around the world. And the fact that that library has been abandoned now for about 5 or 6 years because the ancient timbers sag. Ancient 1-foot diameter Guyanese hardwood eventually tends to sag, and all you need to do is to put a pillar in the middle. The ancient buildings of the Lodge School, 200 years old, there was a sagging beam there. It was 30 feet long, and the government's engineer went and said, this building is going to collapse, vacate it immediately. They vacated it so rapidly that they left all the windows open so that the rain could come in for a year. And then when we heard about it, Frankie, we went and inspected it, and we said, all you need to do is to support that beam, which they did. And instead of bulldozing the whole complex and rebuilding, they restored it at a cost of about $200,000 20 years ago, instead of replacing it at $1 million. So the same thing goes for the Carnegie Library. They will not maintain it, and so the building has been abandoned. It's a great tragedy, and I hope that it will be solved one day. There was an idea, according to the Prime Minister 2 years ago, that that was number 2 on the list after Culloden Farm and the Empire Theatre for Chinese assistance. Well, Empire Theatre is dragging its feet. Culloden Farm might be destroyed. We just don't know. The next object over, of course, is the Montefiore Fountain, which used to be down near to Beckwith Place, at the end of Broad Street.
And the central point of this delightful little square, which needs at least 2 more big shade trees, is the Montefiore fountain, which was looking very sad, but has recently been restored, thank goodness. It was a fountain which the businessman John Montefiore erected to the memory of his father. And this was erected shortly after the cholera epidemic, when for the first time piped water was brought to Bridgetown, so it says that thirsty travellers could have a drink there. And around it is, of course, in Gothic lettering, a whole series of moral and spiritual advice to those people using the fountain. This originally was located at the bottom of Broad Street, opposite the Mutual Building, but it was moved and relocated here.
You know, it is perhaps very difficult to believe that a place where our assemblymen met, and more importantly, a place where the Emancipation Act was proclaimed, has been bulldozed. Dr. Watson and Professor Fraser lament this act and underscore the importance of preserving these treasured pieces of our past.
Now, sometimes we do things through ignorance or lack of respect to the past or what have you. We look onto a tarmac car park. Yet, 30 years ago, a house stood there that should have had meaning and relevance for all Barbadians. That house was called Cod's House. In the 19th century, the House of Assembly functioned from it. In the last act that saw the formal ending of slavery, the ending of the apprenticeship period, in 1838, that act was read that told the people of Barbados and the people of the British Empire that we're finally free from slavery. And that was read from the steps of Cod House. It was demolished, and I said demolished. I wrote a letter to the then Prime Minister about its demolition, and I was told that I wanted to save everything, and everything could not have been saved. And I said, well, sir, you could at least have saved this, because this is the one place that resonated, or should have resonated, for all Barbadians. The one place where, if you really want to talk about freedom, this is where that final act of freedom was determined. And there's not even a marker there to indicate to anybody the significance of that site.
My interest in all of this actually began because I got on a plane one Sunday morning heading for San Diego, and the Sunday paper reported in 1981 that the government was planning, or had already purchased a synagogue, was going to demolish Cod House and build the new Supreme Court, the new Hall of Justice, on the site of Cod House and the synagogue and the Jewish cemetery. And I kind of went a little bit crazy on the plane. I almost said, stop the plane, land. We've got to go back, we've got to stop this, you know. And that's how I got involved. Well, they actually won their case on Cod's House. They demolished it, so now we have this fantastic and inspiring car park. The new generation of Ashkenazi Jews, led by Mr. Paul Altman and the National Trust, restored the synagogue. So at least we saved the synagogue.
And as you can see, the synagogue has been beautifully restored. There's also the Jewish Museum and some beautiful great ledgers to be found right here on the compound. You cannot forget the Jewish Mikveh bath house. It remains one of the wonders of the modern world. Do join us next time as Professor Henry Fraser and Dr. Carl Watson provide more details about the Jewish compound and other interesting sites here in Greater Bridgetown, which is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thank you very much for staying with me. Do join us next time. This has been Our Heritage.